Hey everyone, and welcome back to Too Lazy to Read. So today, we're going to be diving deep into Don't Believe Everything You Think, Why Your Thinking is the Beginning and End of Suffering by Joseph Nguyen.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating look at, how we kind of create our own suffering and how we can move beyond that to actually experience like real peace and joy.
It's so true. And this book is really great for anyone on that self-improvement journey, especially if you feel like you keep hitting those roadblocks, those things that just keep tripping you up.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I love is that Nguyen doesn't just talk about this stuff theoretically, like in chapter 1, which is called The Journey to Finding the Root Cause of Suffering. He actually talks about his own struggles. He was like
Yeah.
trying everything, therapy, meditation, all the things. And he was still dealing with anxiety and just a lot of frustration.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. You try all these different self-help techniques, you're hoping for that magic solution, but you're still left with that underlying feeling, like something's missing.
Totally. It's like you're searching everywhere for your keys, but they're in your pocket the whole time.
Exactly.
So in chapter 2, which is called The Root Cause of All Suffering, Nguyen finally reveals what's in that pocket.
Okay, so tell me.
So he basically argues that we don't actually experience reality objectively. We experience it through the lens of our own thoughts. And to illustrate this, he uses this really simple example of two people sitting in the same coffee shop.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Right. So one person spills their latte and they totally freak out, like their whole day is ruined.
Yeah, been there.
But the other person is so engrossed in a book that they don't even notice.
So it's the same coffee shop, same environment, but completely different realities playing out.
Exactly. And it all comes down to their thinking.
I mean, it makes you wonder how much of our suffering is self-created.
Right.
And it's not to say that what happens around us doesn't matter, but it's our reactions that really determine our experience.
Totally. Like, remember that time your favorite band announced a surprise concert and it sold out before you could get tickets?
Oh, yeah.
If you tend towards negativity, you might spiral into this whole thing about how you always miss out. But if you're wired for positivity, you might be thrilled that you even live in a time when that band exists.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right.
Same event, two totally different internal worlds.
It's wild. And Nguyen uses another great example to drive this point home. Imagine you ask a bunch of people their opinions on a political figure.
Ooh, that's a good one.
You'll get 100 different answers, all shaped by their individual beliefs and experiences, even though it's the same person they're talking about.
I mean, it shows how subjective our perceptions really are.
Totally.
It's like we're all looking through these filters, these lenses that color everything we see.
Yeah. And to really illustrate this concept of how we create our own suffering, Nguyen shares this fascinating Zen story about a young monk.
Ooh, I love Zen stories.
Right. So this monk is trying to meditate, but he keeps getting distracted by all these external things, like birds chirping and people talking.
Well, I can relate to that.
And he blames these distractions for his inability to find peace. So he decides to go meditate in the middle of a lake, thinking he'll finally have some quiet.
Okay, so he's trying to escape the noise.
Exactly. But then a boat bumps into him.
Oh, no.
And he's furious.
Of course.
Until he realizes it's an empty boat.
Ooh.
I know, right? It's such a powerful symbol of how we create our own suffering, by reacting to things that don't actually have any power over us.
So it's not the empty boat itself that caused his suffering. It was his reaction to it.
Exactly. And I think we've all been there. We blame external factors for our inner turmoil, when really it's our own reaction that's causing the problem.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
But once we realize that, it's incredibly liberating, because it means we have the power to change our experience.
So we're not just victims of our circumstances.
Nope. We have the power to choose how we respond.
Which then begs the question, if thinking is the culprit, why do we even do it?
Right. Like, why are we wired to overthink and create all this trauma for ourselves? Well, that's what Nguyen explores in chapter 3, which is called Why Do We Even Think?
I'm intrigued.
And he explains that thinking actually played a crucial role in our survival as a species. Like back in the caveman days, our minds needed to constantly be on alert, scanning for danger, analyzing situations, and remembering past experiences to avoid getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers.
So it was like a built-in survival mechanism.
Exactly. It was essential for staying alive.
And nowadays, we're not really facing saber-toothed tigers on a daily basis.
Not usually.
So you're saying our minds are kind of stuck in overdrive.
Yeah, in a way.
Still reacting to modern-day stressors as if they were life or death situations?
Right. Like, think about all the things that trigger that ancient alarm system today. Work deadlines, relationship conflicts, even social media comparisons.
Oh yeah, social media can be a breeding ground for anxiety.
Totally. Our minds haven't quite caught up to the fact that we're not constantly fighting for survival. So they tend to overreact to everyday stressors,
So we're left with this constant feeling of anxiety and overwhelm.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And that leads to all sorts of unnecessary suffering.
But it sounds like there's hope.
Oh, definitely. Just because our minds are wired for survival doesn't mean we're stuck with those ancient programs forever.
I like the sound of that.
Right. We can evolve beyond simply surviving to actually thriving.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Well, Nguyen says it starts by understanding the difference between thoughts and thinking, which is the focus of Chapter 4, thoughts versus thinking.
That sounds simple, but I bet it's more complex than it seems.
Oh, for sure. And this distinction is key to understanding how we create our own reality.
Okay, so break it down for me. What's the difference between thoughts and thinking?
So Nguyen describes thoughts as these like effortless mental sparks that come from what he calls the universal mind. They're like raw materials, neutral, creative, full of potential.
So they're just popping in and out of our awareness all the time.
Exactly. It's like a flowing river,
Okay, I can picture that.
always moving,
Yeah?
always changing.
So if those are thoughts, what's thinking then?
Thinking is when we grab onto one of those passing thoughts and start analyzing it, judging it, worrying about it.
So it's like the mental chatter, the stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. We take those neutral sparks and we turn them into something heavy and burdensome.
We add all these layers of meaning and interpretation.
It's like we're damming up that flowing river.
With our need to overanalyze and control everything.
Exactly.
So essentially, thoughts are the ingredients, and thinking is what we do with them.
I like that. And unfortunately, we often use those ingredients to cook up a recipe for disaster.
Oh, yeah.
Nguyen even has this thought experiment where he asks you to imagine your desired income.
Okay.
At first, the thought itself feels good, right?
Yeah, I can imagine that.
But then the thinking mind kicks in,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're bombarded with doubts and fears and reasons why it's impossible.
It's like we start adding limitations to something that was initially full of possibility.
Exactly.
Our minds are such expert saboteurs.
They really are. It's no wonder Nguyen says that thoughts create, thinking destroys.
That's such a powerful statement.
Yeah. It really highlights how our own minds can hold us back from experiencing true peace and joy.
Which leads us to a question that I think a lot of people have, especially in the self-help world. If we can only feel what we're thinking, doesn't that mean we need to think positively to feel good?
Ah, yes, the age-old debate of positive thinking. What does Nguyen say about that?
Well, in Chapter 5, which is called If We Can Only Feel What We're Thinking, Don't We Need to Think Positively to Feel That Way? Nguyen challenges this idea of forced positivity. He asks us to think back to a time when we felt true joy or love, like pure, unadulterated joy.
Okay.
Were there specific positive thoughts running through your mind at that moment?
You know, now that you mention it, I don't think so. It was more like a feeling that just washed over me.
Exactly. And Nguyen argues that that's the point. True happiness isn't something we achieve through positive thinking. It's our natural state of being.
That's a new way to think about it.
And he uses babies as an example. They just radiate joy and love without all the complex thought patterns that we adults have.
They're like little Zen masters.
Right.
It's like we're born with this innate capacity for joy. But somewhere along the way, we learn to overthink it and block it out.
Exactly. And that brings us to Chapter 6, where Nguyen dives into the framework for understanding how our human experience is actually created.
Okay, I'm all ears.
It's called How the Human Experience is Created, the Three Principles. And it's based on the work of Sydney Banks.
Okay, I'm familiar with Sydney Banks,
Yeah.
so tell me more about these three principles.
The first principle is the universal mind, which in Nguyen compares to electricity. It's the invisible force that powers everything, the source of all creation.
Okay, that makes sense.
The next principle is consciousness, which is like the TV or DVD player. It allows us to perceive and experience the world that's created by the universal mind.
Okay, so the universal mind is the power source, and consciousness is the tool for experiencing.
Exactly.
So where do our thoughts fit into all of this?
Thoughts are like the DVD, the specific information or programming that's being processed by consciousness.
Okay, I'm starting to see the picture. So we have this infinite power source, the universal mind, and this amazing tool, consciousness. And then our thoughts come in or kind of dictate what we experience.
Precisely.
It's both empowering and a little daunting.
Ah, so.
Well, because if our thoughts are creating our reality, then it means we're responsible for our own suffering.
That's true. But it also means we have the power to change our experience.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really important question. If thinking is the root of our suffering, how do we stop?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And that's what Nguyen tackles in Chapter 7. If thinking is the root cause of our suffering, how do we stop thinking?
Okay, so how do we stop thinking?
Well, Nguyen starts by telling this really interesting Zen parable.
Ooh, I love a good parable.
So this parable is about a fierce samurai warrior who goes to visit a wise old Zen master. He's heard all these stories about this master, and he wants to learn the secrets of heaven and hell.
Oh, okay.
So the samurai finally finds the master, and he demands, "Show me heaven and hell."
Wow.
I know, right? And the master, with this knowing smile,
Mm-hmm.
replies, "Heaven and hell are not places. They are states of mind. Look at you, impatient, arrogant, demanding. You are already in hell."
That's a pretty direct answer.
Right, and the samurai is enraged. He draws his sword, ready to strike the master down.
Oh, no.
And the master just calmly says, "See, now you are in hell."
That's amazing.
I know, right? And the samurai is totally taken aback by the master's composure. He pauses, lowers his sword, and bows in understanding.
Wow, so he finally gets it.
He does. And the master then says, "And now you are in heaven."
That parable is so powerful.
I know, right? It
Yes.
perfectly illustrates how we create our own heaven or hell through our reactions to whatever life throws our way.
It's not about the external circumstances, it's about our internal state. And that's the key to understanding how to stop thinking. It's not about silencing our minds completely, which is impossible. It's about becoming aware of our thoughts and choosing how we respond to them.
So it's not about controlling our thoughts, it's about controlling our reactions.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's like a snow globe. When you shake it up, the snow swirls around chaotically, but when you let it sit still, the snow settles, and you can see clearly.
Okay, like that analogy.
Our minds are kind of like that snow globe. When we're constantly thinking and reacting, our minds are all cloudy and chaotic.
But when we can calm our minds and just observe our thoughts without judgment, then we can start to see things more clearly.
Exactly.
But how do we actually do that? It sounds pretty abstract.
Nguyen offers a really practical analogy. Imagine a glass of dirty water. If you keep stirring it up, the water will stay murky. But if you let it sit still, the dirt will eventually settle to the bottom, leaving the water clear.
Okay.
Our minds are similar. When we become aware of our thoughts and we stop engaging with them, they naturally begin to calm down.
So it's not about fighting our thoughts. It's about creating space for them to settle.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense. But here's the thing. We live in a world that glorifies busyness and productivity. How can we possibly thrive without constantly thinking and strategizing and planning?
That's a great question. And it's one that Nguyen tackles in Chapter 8. How can we possibly thrive in the world without thinking?
So what's the answer?
Well, Nguyen challenges us to reconsider our beliefs about thinking. And he introduces us to the concept of mushin.
Wushin.
It's a Japanese term that translates to no mind.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I fully understand it.
Think of an athlete who's completely in the zone. Their movements are effortless, intuitive, almost instinctual.
Okay, I can picture that.
They're not thinking about their technique or strategizing their next move. They're simply present in the moment, fully immersed in the experience.
So they're not overthinking.
Exactly. That's mushin, a state of pure awareness, free from the distractions of the thinking mind.
I've definitely experienced those moments of flow where I'm so absorbed in what I'm doing that time seems to disappear and everything just clicks.
Exactly. And Nguyen argues that this state of mushin isn't just for athletes or artists. It's available to all of us if we learn to quiet the mental chatter and tap into our intuitive wisdom.
But here's the common fear. If we stop overthinking everything, what about our goals and dreams and ambitions?
Right.
Will we just become passive couch potatoes, content with mediocrity?
That's a valid concern, and it's one that Nguyen addresses in Chapter 9. If we stop thinking, what do we do about our goals, dreams, and ambitions?
So what does he say?
He makes a crucial distinction between goals that are driven by desperation and goals that are fueled by inspiration.
Okay.
Goals that are born from desperation often stem from a place of fear or lack or insecurity.
We set them because we feel like we need to achieve something, to prove ourselves worthy.
Or to escape feelings of inadequacy.
It's like we're on a hamster wheel, running and running, but never really getting anywhere.
Exactly.
I've definitely been there. Setting goals out of a sense of I should, rather than a genuine desire.
And it never really feels good, does
No,
it?
it's always heavy and exhausting. Even when I achieve the goal,
The satisfaction is fleeting.
and then you're right back to feeling like you need to prove yourself again.
Exactly.
So what's the alternative?
Well, Nguyen says that goals that are inspired by a genuine passion or purpose feel light and expansive and exciting.
They come from a place of abundance and joy.
A desire to create something meaningful simply for the love of it.
Remember those times when you felt a surge of inspiration? A deep knowing that you were meant to do something specific.
Yes.
Those are the goals we want to cultivate, the ones that align with our authentic selves and bring us a sense of fulfillment, regardless of the outcome.
Exactly.
Those inspired goals feel so different. It's like they have a life force of their own.
And even the challenges along the way feel exhilarating rather than draining.
Yeah.
So how do we tap into that wellspring of inspiration? Nguyen suggests asking yourself a powerful question. If I had infinite money, had already traveled the world, had no fear, and didn't receive any recognition for what I do, what would I do? Or what would I create?
Wow, that's a great question. It really forces you to get clear about what truly matters to you.
It strips away all the external pressures and expectations.
And it helps you connect with your deepest passions and purpose.
The things that light you up from the inside out.
I love that.
But even when we know what we're passionate about, we can still get stuck in the how.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We start overthinking and second-guessing and questioning our abilities.
And that leads us right back to that cycle of suffering.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate that tension between pursuing our inspired goals and letting go of the need to control the outcome?
That's what Chapter 10 explores. Unconditional love and creation.
Okay, tell me more.
This chapter is all about learning to create from a place of pure joy and abundance, without attaching our worth to the results.
So it's about creating for the love of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Not for any external reward or validation.
To illustrate this concept, Nguyen shares a personal anecdote about his girlfriend.
Okay.
He asked her why she loved him, and her response was simply, I don't know, I just do.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It's love in its purest form, no conditions, no expectations, just a deep inherent knowing.
And Nguyen connects that experience to the idea of unconditional creation.
Creating something simply for the joy of it.
There's a freedom and a lightness to that approach that's so refreshing.
But even when we start to experience this peace and joy, our minds can still try to sabotage us.
Oh yeah, I've been there.
That's what Chapter 11 is all about. What do you do next after experiencing peace, joy, love, and fulfillment in the present?
So what are some of those obstacles that pop up when we start to make real progress?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is that our minds are so used to the drama and struggle that peace can actually feel unfamiliar, even a little unsettling.
It's like our minds are addicted to the chaos, and peace feels almost alien. We might start to think, wait, something must be wrong if I'm this happy. Where's the conflict? Where's the suffering?
Right. We've been conditioned to believe that happiness is fleeting. And if we're not constantly striving or worrying, we're somehow failing.
It's like we've been programmed to believe that happiness is a reward for hard work and struggle, rather than our natural state of being.
Exactly.
So those anxieties that we feel when we start to experience peace and joy are often the ego's attempt to regain control.
It wants to keep us stuck in familiar patterns, even if those patterns are causing us pain.
It's like that old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't.
Right.
We cling to the familiar comfort of suffering because it's what we're used to.
Even if it's making us miserable.
But we don't have to.
Nguyen reminds us that we have a choice. We can continue to identify with the ego's stories, or we can choose to step into the unknown and embrace the possibility of something greater.
It's about reclaiming our power, recognizing that we're not victims of our thoughts, but rather creators of our own reality. And that leads us to another important concept, letting go of judgment.
Which Nguyen explores in Chapter 12. Nothing is either good or bad.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Nguyen uses this brilliant analogy of a piano to illustrate how our judgments color our experience.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
There are no inherently wrong keys on a piano, just different notes that create different sounds.
Right.
It's our thinking that assigns value judgments to those notes, deciding which ones are good or bad, based on the context of the song we're playing.
Okay, I love this analogy.
And it's the same with life. We tend to label people and situations, and even our own choices, as good or bad, which creates a lot of unnecessary suffering.
It's like we're constantly trying to fit everything into neat little boxes instead of appreciating the nuances and complexities of life.
Exactly.
And all that labeling and judging takes us away from the present moment
Yeah.
and keeps us trapped in our heads.
Right.
We get so caught up in our mental commentary that we miss out on the richness of the experience itself.
It's like we're watching life through a filter of our own judgments, instead of seeing it for what it truly is.
Exactly. So if we let go of judging everything as good or bad, how do we know what to do? How do we make decisions without overthinking and second-guessing ourselves?
That's a great question, and it's one that Nguyen addresses in Chapter 13. How do you know what to do without thinking?
I'm all ears, because that's something I struggle with constantly.
Well, Nguyen acknowledges that there are no inherently wrong decisions, just like there are no wrong keys on a piano.
Yeah.
But some decisions create more harmonious outcomes than others, and our intuition is often the best guide to making those choices.
Intuition, that inner knowing that often speaks to us in whispers. But we tend to drown it out with the loud, insistent voice of our thinking minds.
Exactly.
But how do we learn to trust that inner voice? Especially when it goes against what logic or reason is telling us.
That's what Chapter 14 explores, how to follow your intuition.
Okay, I'm ready to learn.
This chapter is all about recognizing the wisdom of our intuition and learning to follow its guidance, even when it seems illogical or unconventional.
So it's about trusting our gut.
Yes. Nguyen points out that intuition often operates outside the realm of our rational minds, so it can feel risky or even foolish to trust it.
But those intuitive leaps are often the ones that lead to the most incredible breakthroughs and discoveries.
Exactly.
It's like those times when you just know something is right, even if you can't explain it.
There's a certainty and a clarity that transcends logic.
But it takes courage to act on those intuitive nudges, especially when everyone around you is telling you to play it safe.
It does. It takes a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones and embrace the unknown.
And the biggest obstacle to following our intuition is fear.
Fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of judgment. These are the voices that try to keep us small and safe.
Fear is such a powerful force.
It can keep us paralyzed in indecision, even when we know deep down what we're meant to do.
So how do we overcome that fear and step into the fullness of our potential?
Well, Nguyen reframes fear as an indicator of something truly important.
Okay, that's interesting.
He suggests that when we feel fear, it's a sign that we're on the right track, that we're moving towards something that matters deeply to us.
Well, it's not a stop sign.
No, it's a guidepost, a signal that we're stretching beyond our perceived limitations and stepping into the realm of the extraordinary.
I love that reframe.
Instead of seeing fear as an enemy to be avoided, we can see it as an invitation to step into our greatness.
The more fear we feel,
Yeah,
the more potential there is for growth and transformation.
exactly.
And when we choose to follow our intuition despite the fear, we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities, a world where miracles can happen.
Which brings us to Chapter 15, Creating Space for Miracles.
Okay, I love the sound of that.
Nguyen starts this chapter with a classic Zen story about a scholar who goes to visit a Zen master to learn about Zen.
Okay.
The master invites the scholar in for tea, and he begins pouring tea into the scholar's cup. But even after the cup is full, the master keeps pouring, and the tea overflows onto the table.
Oh, I know this story. It's a metaphor for how we need to empty our minds to receive new knowledge and insights.
Exactly. The scholar is confused, and he asks the master why he keeps pouring when the cup is already full. And the master replies, like this cup, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?
We can't learn anything new if we're already full of our own opinions and beliefs.
Precisely.
We need to create space in our minds to let go of our preconceived notions and limiting beliefs, to allow for new possibilities to emerge.
Exactly. And Nguyen relates this concept to the idea of nothingness as the source of all creation.
Okay, that's
But
interesting.
he draws a parallel to the Big Bang Theory, where the universe arose from a state of pure potentiality, a void of nothingness.
That's mind-blowing.
Creation itself arises from a state of emptiness.
And we need to cultivate that same sense of spaciousness within ourselves, to allow for our own unique expression to unfold.
Exactly.
So what happens when we actually start living in this state of non-thinking?
Well, Nguyen prepares us for some of the potential challenges in Chapter 16. What happens when you begin living in non-thinking? Potential obstacles.
So it's not all rainbows and butterflies.
Not necessarily.
What are some of the hurdles we might encounter on this path?
One of the biggest challenges is that our minds are so accustomed to the drama of overthinking that peace can actually feel uncomfortable.
That makes sense. Our minds are addicted to the chaos.
And peace can feel almost alien.
We might start to doubt ourselves, thinking, am I doing enough? Am I being productive? Am I still relevant?
Exactly. We might even start to feel guilty for feeling happy or peaceful, especially if we've been conditioned to believe that we need to suffer to earn our worth.
It's like we've been programmed to believe that happiness is a reward for hard work and struggle, rather than our natural state of being.
Exactly.
So those doubts and anxieties that we feel, when we start to experience peace and joy, are often the ego's last-ditch effort to maintain control.
It wants to keep us tethered to the familiar, even if the familiar is causing us pain.
But Nguyen reminds us that those fears are just delusions. Stories our minds are telling us to keep us trapped in old patterns.
We have a choice. We can choose to believe those stories, or we can choose to see them for what they are, just thoughts.
So how do we navigate those challenging moments when the ego is screaming for attention?
Nguyen offers several practical tools and techniques to help us stay the course.
Like what?
Well, he encourages us to cultivate a regular practice of meditation or mindfulness, which helps us become more aware of our thoughts and create distance from the ego stories.
Meditation is such a powerful tool.
It is.
Once you start paying attention to your thoughts, you realize how often they're running on autopilot, creating all sorts of unnecessary drama.
Exactly. He also suggests creating an activation ritual, a morning routine that sets us up for a day of peace and flow.
What kind of things would be included in an activation ritual?
It could involve journaling, affirmations, visualization, gratitude practices, anything that helps us connect with our inner wisdom and align with our intentions for the day.
I love that.
Instead of starting the day reacting to whatever's thrown at us, we're consciously choosing how we want to show up and experience the day.
And finally, Nguyen encourages us to surround ourselves with a supportive community of like-minded individuals who are also on a path of personal growth and transformation.
That's so important. It's easy to feel like we're the only ones struggling with these challenges.
But when we connect with others who are on a similar journey, it can be incredibly validating and empowering.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the final chapter of the book, chapter 17. Now what?
After all this deep inner work, where do we go from here?
What does Nguyen say about living a life of peace, joy, and fulfillment?
Well, he reminds us that we're not just learning about this stuff in theory. He actually gives us concrete tools, like exercises we can use every day, to actually put these ideas into practice.
Yeah, like it's one thing to understand the concepts, but it's another thing to actually apply them in our lives.
Right. And that's why I love that he includes this section called A Guide to Stop Thinking. It's packed with all sorts of practical strategies for recognizing and moving past those negative thought patterns that keep us stuck.
Yeah, it's like having a personal coach in the book,
Totally.
guiding you step by step.
And one of the things he emphasizes in that guide is the importance of being mindful of our environment.
Oh yeah, like
Yeah.
our surroundings can have a huge impact on our mental state.
Exactly. And he talks about becoming aware of the things that trigger negative thinking for us, whether it's certain people or places, or even the information we consume.
It's like becoming a detective of your own mind,
Right. Figuring out what sets off those alarm bells.
and then finding ways to either minimize those triggers
Yeah.
or eliminate them altogether.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding negative triggers. It's also about cultivating positive ones.
Oh yeah, like surrounding ourselves with things that make us feel good.
Right. Things that inspire us and uplift us
Yeah.
and help us feel connected to our true selves.
This could be anything from spending time in nature, to listening to music that makes us happy, to surrounding ourselves with people who support and encourage us.
It's about consciously creating an environment that supports our well-being.
And that includes our work lives too,
Mm.
right? Like work can be such a major source of stress for so many people.
Absolutely. And Nguyen has a whole section on implementing non-thinking into your work.
So how do we apply these principles in a work setting?
Well, he suggests starting by making a list of the activities that drain our energy at work versus the ones that energize us.
It's like doing an inventory of your work life.
Exactly. Figuring out what lights you up and what leaves you feeling depleted.
And then what?
Then the goal is to gradually shift your focus towards those energizing activities, even if it means making some big changes.
So that might involve delegating tasks, setting boundaries, or even exploring new career paths.
It's about creating a work life that feels aligned and fulfilling, rather than draining and stressful.
That's so important. We spend so much of our lives working. It makes sense to create an environment that supports our well-being.
Absolutely.
And speaking of creating a supportive environment, Nguyen also addresses the challenge of overcoming destructive habits. You know those pesky habits that we all have?
Yeah, we all have them.
The ones we know aren't serving us.
Yeah.
But they can be so hard to break.
So how do we tackle those self-sabotaging tendencies?
Well, Nguyen encourages us to become aware of the triggers, the thoughts, and the beliefs that are driving those habits,
It's about understanding the root cause of those behaviors.
rather than just trying to white-knuckle our way through them.
Exactly.
It's like getting to the heart of the matter, figuring out what need that habit is trying to fulfill.
And then finding a healthier way to meet that need.
So it's not about beating ourselves up for our bad habits. It's about approaching them with curiosity and understanding.
Exactly. Which makes it much easier to create lasting change.
So after all this inner work, how do we know if we're actually making progress?
That's a great question.
How can we tell if we're truly experiencing a state of non-thinking?
Well, Nguyen addresses that in the final section of the book, called How You Will Know If You're in a State of Non-Thinking. He says that you'll know you're in a state of non-thinking when you feel a sense of peace, love, joy, passion, excitement, inspiration, and bliss.
That sounds amazing.
It's about feeling connected to yourself, to others, and to something larger than yourself.
It's about feeling in flow and experiencing life as a joyful, effortless dance.
Exactly.
And the best part is, this state is available to all of us.
If we're willing to do the inner work.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into don't believe everything you think, what are some final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
If there's one message I hope resonates with our listeners, it's that you have the power to create a life of peace, joy, and fulfillment. You are not a victim of your circumstances or your thoughts. You are a powerful creator, and you have the ability to choose happiness in every moment.
That's such a beautiful and empowering message. And if you're feeling inspired to explore these concepts further, I highly recommend checking out Don't Believe Everything You Think by Joseph Nguyen. It's a life-changing read.
It really is.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to Too Lazy to Read for more insightful conversations about books that can transform your life.
We'll be back soon with another mind-blowing read.
Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep choosing joy.